Why does the king inherit from strangers who die alone? The answer starts in 1065, when King Henry Thierry handed his second son Edmund the confiscated lands of a defeated rebel baron, along with a new title, Earl of Lancaster. Over the next century, that estate grew through marriages, forfeitures, and royal grants, until it became one of the largest private landholdings in medieval England. Then, in 1399, everything changed. The duchy's heir, Henry Bolingbroke, seized the English throne and became King Henry IV. His first act as king was to decree that his own inheritance, the Duchy of Lancaster, would be held separately from every other crown possession, passed down like a private family estate rather than public property. Edward IV confirmed that separation in 1461. Soon after taking the throne, Henry commissioned what became known as the Great Coucher Book, a vast written record of every landholding, title, and right within the duchy, running to more than 2,400 documents. It survives today as one of the most complete surveys of medieval English land ownership outside the Domesday Book itself, a reminder that this was never treated as an afterthought. From its very first years, the duchy was managed as a serious, carefully documented estate in its own right. 3 centuries later, in 1760, that same separation is the reason the duchy was never folded into the deal that created the civil list. It has stood apart from the rest of the monarchy's finances ever since. One consequence of that 700-year-old separation survives today, in an unusually literal form. When someone dies without a will and without any relative entitled to inherit under the ordinary rules, spouse, children, parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, their estate becomes what the law calls bona vacantia, ownerless property. Across most of England, that property passes to the government, and the Treasury's own list currently holds more than 6,000 such unclaimed estates, publicly advertised in case a distant relative comes forward to claim one. But if the deceased's last address was in the historic County Palatine of Lancaster, covering parts of Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, Cheshire, and Cumbria, or within the county of Cornwall, the estate doesn't go to the Treasury at all. It goes to the Duchy of Lancaster, held by the King, or the Duchy of Cornwall, held by the Prince of Wales. The rule is codified today in the Administration of Estates Act 1925, but the geography it follows is drawn from medieval boundaries, nearly 7 centuries old. The duchy runs its own version of the same public list, advertising each unclaimed estate under its jurisdiction and inviting genealogists or long-lost relatives to come forward with proof of kinship. Most cases are modest, a small bank balance, a house with no obvious heir, but the sheer number of them, multiplied across decades, is what turns an odd medieval leftover into a meaningful revenue stream. Only once a claim window has closed with no successful claimant does the estate's value formally become the duchy's to keep or spend under its own rules. For most of its history, this arrangement drew almost no attention. That changed in 2023, when a Guardian investigation examined a decade of Duchy of Lancaster records and found the estate had collected more than £60 million through bona vacantia. According to the duchy's own accounts, only around 15% of that money had gone to charity. The investigation reported that a significant share of the remainder had instead financed renovations on properties the duchy owns and rents out commercially, meaning money from people who died with no one left to inherit it was, in effect, subsidizing a property business. The scale becomes clearer in a single year's accounts. In one recent reporting year, bona vacantia brought the duchy £3.8 million after administrative costs. That was a fraction of the duchy's total annual surplus of £26 million, drawn mostly from its wider 700-year-old property portfolio, which by then held net assets of £641 million. The bona vacantia figure is small next to those totals. What made it a story wasn't the size of the number. It was where the number came from. The duchy disputes the idea that any of this money benefits the king personally. A spokeswoman told the BBC that none of the unclaimed funds go toward the privy purse, the king's private income. Instead, she said, the money is directed to 3 specific charities, the Duchy of Lancaster Benevolent Fund, the Duke of Lancaster Housing Trust, and the Duchy's Jubilee Trust, or used to protect and preserve historic buildings on the estate. The Duchy's stated policy is explicit on this point. Bona vacantia funds, it says, can be used to preserve historic assets, but are not meant to generate income. Following the Guardian's reporting, the Duchy published new internal guidance spelling out exactly what qualifying projects can and cannot be funded this way. An unusual step for an institution that had operated for decades without publishing any such policy at all. Before that, the Duchy had never felt any obligation to explain its reasoning in public at all, since bona vacantia income had simply been folded into the wider accounts for centuries without drawing a single question from outside auditors or the press. Campaigners see a contradiction in that distinction. Republic, the group pushing to replace the monarchy with an elected head of state, has described the arrangement plainly as a royal death tax, taking issue not with the legal mechanism itself, but with what happens to the money afterward. Their argument is that renovating a commercial property, even framed as preservation, still increases the value of an asset the Duchy later profits from by renting it out. Meaning funds from the estates of people with no heirs end up improving the Duchy's own bottom line regardless of which line item they're booked under. The same rule applies just as literally across the Tamar in Cornwall, where the Duchy of Cornwall, now held by the Prince of Wales, administers bona vacantia for anyone who dies intestate within the county boundary, extending as far as the Isles of Scilly. It is a smaller duchy than Lancaster's, but it operates on the identical medieval logic. An estate carved out for an heir centuries ago that still quietly absorbs the unclaimed property of ordinary people who happened to live within its borders and left no one behind to say otherwise. The two duchies rarely appear in the same conversation, since one belongs to the king and the other to his son, but on this particular point they function as mirror images of each other, the same rule quietly running on both sides of the country. Anyone can search the Duchy's own advertised list today, the same way genealogists and probate researchers already do, cross-checking names against death records in the hope of finding a distant, unclaimed inheritance before the Duchy does. In practice, very few searches succeed. Most of the people on these lists lived and died with no one keeping track of them at all, which is precisely why their estates ended up in a 700-year-old system built for exactly that gap. Nearly 700 years after a king decided his inheritance would never be ordinary crown property, that same decision still quietly redirects the estates of strangers, people with no will and no family left to claim them, into one of the oldest private fortunes in Britain.